After having witnessed the rantings of an absolute madman at the State of the Union address last evening in Washington, D.C., I would now recommend that everyone within the sound of my voice double whatever it is they have put back for an emergency food supply. This new piece of information, the Russians controlling the vast majority of the world's fertilizer supply, now has a much more ominous tone to it. The sanctions that he's talking about, the President of the United States, they are going to destroy the U.S. economy, not the world economy, and not even every state in the Union, but the U.S. is going to suffer greatly for this. Last night was a clinic on diminished mental capacity and operating out of emotion only. There was no thought in this shell of a man. It was just one emotional platitude after another. The governor of the state of Florida once again stands alone. He stood alone at the beginning of 2020 when everyone castigated Florida for pushing back, and now we see that it was the right thing to do. Well, he's there again. This was his response to the State of the Union. This is the flag of the Florida Militia. This is our flag. Not the National Guard, the militia. This is our message to the rest of Joe Biden's America. Leave us alone or suffer the consequences. Now, I'd like to make an analogy that I think a lot of people can relate to. Over at the Florida Maquis Patreon channel, we've been teaching psychological operations, and I used this example from the series Colony. There's this woman in the series. Her husband goes off like some cowboy, trying to do something good, but doesn't talk to her about what he's doing and gets himself arrested. She has no idea where he is. So she has to go deal with some seedy people. And seedy people sometimes make seedy demands. Now, I've gotten a lot of pushback saying, well, Florida Maquis, I understand what you're saying, but I would never demean myself. I would never be anybody's puppet. If somebody that I was involved with went off and did something that irresponsible, they'd be on their own. I would take care of myself, and I'd let them fend for themselves. Clearly, if they didn't have enough respect for me to talk to me, they'd be on their own. You see, that's key. Nobody wants to feel like anybody's puppet, do they? Florida does not see itself as Washington, D.C.'s puppet. Many people think of the president as the chief governor, and all the 50 governors of the states are all just little assistant presidents. That isn't how it works. Now, why would that not be the case with Venezuela? 4 years ago, I began making videos saying that Venezuela was the greatest geopolitical miscalculation D.C. has ever made. Guess what? It's now the second. This thing with Russia and Ukraine is now the first. The sanctions didn't work against Venezuela, did they? Venezuela's in an incredibly powerful position right now. Nicolas Maduro is still in power. 3/4 of the world recognizes him as the leader of Venezuela. They still have the world's largest known oil reserves. And now with the price of oil going up and up and up and up, they're just getting richer by the day. If it didn't work with Venezuela, why would it work with Russia? It's the same idea. Nobody wants to be seen as anyone's marionette, as anyone's toy to be played with. The Venezuelans would rather be seen as starving, poor Venezuelans than be seen as rich, well-fed puppets of Washington, D.C. It's the same idea. And that's the same idea Florida has. We would rather suffer under any withering assault from the other 48 states, 49 states, than be seen as colluding with Washington, D.C. These are the kinds of things we teach over the Florida Maquis Patreon channel. Psychological operations, how to see through this kind of stuff. How to maintain yourself in a thought mode as opposed to being in an emotional mode like we saw for a little over an hour last night out of Washington, D.C. I've said before, I'll say again, I was not a door kicker. I was not a SEAL. I was not some combat fighter pilot. I was not some super soldier. My job, human intelligence, the human mind. Getting inside the mind of your enemy. Most recent video put up last night called A Poisoned Mind takes a deeper dive into what's really going to happen with the New World Order. And this is the New World Order. People think, oh, Russia's standing alone. Russia's standing alone. Absolutely not. Mexico has now come out and said they're not participating in Washington, D.C.'s sanctions of Russia. Mexico, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Iran, India, China, Myanmar, Belarus. They have plenty of places to buy and sell things. Plenty of places. Biden is living in some fantasy land if he thinks these sanctions are going to work. And here are the articles. Mexico declines to join Russia's sanctions, 1 March 2022. Venezuela's leader pledges military cooperation with Russia, 16 February 2022, once again in control of the world's largest known oil reserves. Jair Bolsonaro from Brazil will not take sides between Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian envoy pleads India to help. Prime Minister Modi talks to President Putin. Russian oligarchs' yachts head for the Maldives, that's a little island chain off the southern coast of India, to protect their assets. Iran criticized at home for tepid response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's going to be all sorts of places where Russia can sell things and buy things. If DC's sanctions did not work against Venezuela, what makes them think it's going to work against Russia? It's just not going to work. And we're going to be the ones to pay the price for it. Now, there's an absolutely spectacular take on this from Kim Iverson. She does commentary over at The Hill. It's a 2-minute clip that I'd like to share with you guys. And once you listen to what she has to say and the reasoning behind it, it will all start to coalesce and congeal and make sense. So let me get the camera set and the microphone set, and we'll take a listen to this.
The economic sanctions are going to be hurting Russia, but they've been hit with sanctions, and they've seen others hit with sanctions. So they have prepared for this. And this is kind of one of those things where the United States and the West, in our posturing, in our economic sanctions of Russia, in our going after them, we sort of have this attitude of we're too big to fail. And the reality is these countries have sort of figured out the game plan by now. We've been overusing sanctions, and countries have been able to prepare. So, for example, Russia has vastly increased their domestic production of food and domestic production of their own medicine. They've been preparing for the day that the United States would come after them. China's been doing the same thing, and so have many other nations. Now, the ruble did take a 30% hit yesterday, but Russia's central bank immediately more than doubled its interest rate to heat off the inflation. So meanwhile, price of energy is just going to come at a premium, driving us into a recession. Our economic sanctions against Russia are likely going to backfire. We already have out of control inflation. That's going to drive us into a recession. The central bank then raising interest rates is only going to make it worse. So there's actually a real possibility that we're hurting ourselves more than we're hurting Russia. The economic sanctions, like I mentioned, will hurt Russia, but they've insulated themselves quite a bit. It's not going to kill them. They've seen what's happened in Iran. They've been able to, believe it or not, weather the economic sanctions storm, and Russia's in a better position than Iran to do this. So Russia and China, amongst many others, are looking to replace the US dollar as the world currency. This is a no-brainer. This is obviously what's happening. And if not replace it, at least add another robust option or two, which is what they mentioned in the statement that they put out, saying that they're looking to create a multipolar global world order. And this is looking more and more likely. Now, a lot of people say, no way, there's no way that the dollar is going to be replaced because of the advantages. And the US dollar has had many advantages that has made it the world currency, but those advantages are fading. Limited inflation and depreciation was one of the reasons why the world likes to use the dollar, but that is no longer the case. I mean, inflation right now is no longer limited, nor is it transitory. The economy, our economy is very large. That was one of the other reasons why the world liked to use the US dollar, but China's got a large economy also. And of course, we do have a open market, and that is one of the reasons why the dollar is still being used. But again,
2 minutes of absolute best take I have heard on this. Now, there's another take out there. It's a little bit longer read. Abby Martin. A few years ago, I believe it was 3 or 4 years ago, did an interview with a Peruvian named Immortal Technique. And it's still on YouTube. You can find it, Immortal Technique and Abby Martin, Our Ignorance Affects the World, where they basically warn of this. And how Washington, D.C., and a lot of Americans don't understand how nationalistic a lot of South America is. People talk about social democracy down there. I think they should use a different word. They really should, because people equate socialism these days with AOC and high taxes and anti-capitalism and all this kind of stuff. That's really not the case. The Peruvians are very proud people. So are the Venezuelans. So are the Mexicans. So are the Brazilians. And they would rather suffer being who they are. They would rather go without rather than see themselves be put under the thumb of another major power. Now, Abby does another take on this. It's about an hour and 54 minutes long. Ukraine questions for the U.S. anti-war movement. There are a lot of leftists right now bending themselves into pretzels on this as to whose side should we or should we not be on. Because now isn't Russia being imperialistic? I thought D.C. was the only imperialist game in town. Now we have the Russians invading. So who are you for? Are you for U.S.? Are you for the... it's a very difficult thing for them because they can't see the reality. And the reality is where Florida is right now. We are not going to get involved in something that doesn't necessarily affect us just to be seen as virtue signaling. It's like you've got to be for Ukraine if you're for freedom. You've got to be for Ukraine if you're for liberty. It's a bunch of horse crap. We're not going to join everyone down bowing at the altar of Zelensky, because a lot of what's going on right now could have been avoided by different decisions being made in Ukraine. And this is echoed by our governor. Leave us out of it. Not our monkeys, not our circus. And just by not getting in the I identify as game, people are going to try to demonize us, saying if we don't come out on one side or the other, that somehow we're choosing a side. But once again, if you would like a deeper dive into this, the psychological dysphorias that make people believe they have to identify one way or the other, we would love to have you over at Patreon. $1 per month, even less if you sign up for a year, fully refundable. You can inbox me over there. And if you have some issue with the content or the imagery or anything like that, I'll send you your $1 back. Absolutely no problem at all. Joe Biden is a madman. double your food supply sooner rather than later. God bless. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.